He's been called an Uncle Tom, among other things. He's a young man that wasn't expected to succeed, but boy, did he show them. Welcome to another episode of Conversations. This is the show where we talk about anything and everything. Today we're going to talk about Uncle Tom. We're going to do this by interviewing a young man who starred in the film Uncle Tom. I was also in that film. Black conservative women can be called Uncle Tom too. My guest is Chad Jackson, who is an entrepreneur. He starred in the film, but now he has become a filmmaker in his own right. Help me to welcome Chad Jackson to Conversations. Chad, you've been a busy young man.
Yes, very busy.
I understand that you have become a filmmaker after pretty much getting a start, I would say, in the film Uncle Tom that was released. When was it released?
It was released Juneteenth, actually, of 2020. So
right.
We had the premiere in Dallas.
And Larry Elder was the producer.
Yes, he was the executive producer.
And now you are producing a sequel to the first Uncle Tom.
Yeah, so the way that I see it, Uncle Tom was a kind of conservatism 101. And we talk about how we as blacks who are called Uncle Tom, the reason why we have conservative views, conservative values, after having learned the real history of black people and the real history of our country, how we believe that the history that is taught in our schools is a kind of revisionist history that is meant to keep us in our place, so to speak, to keep us voting for Democrats. And so the film kind of explores the oral history of the black conservative in America.
Okay, but tell our viewers more about you
Yes.
and your life story.
Yeah, so as you said, I'm a business owner, a plumber. Back in 2018, I was approached by some filmmakers to sit down for an interview because they understood that I had conservative values. And at first I was reluctant to sit down with them. I didn't know what this was about. I kind of had this initial thought that it was maybe like an exploitation type film about black conservatives. So
especially when you were approached by some white guys, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I finally agreed to sit down with him. The interview went great. Justin Malone, who's the director of Uncle Tom, asked really good questions, really thought-provoking questions, and it was very natural, much like this interview is now. And he left, haven't heard from him in like 2 months, and finally he reached out to me and said, hey, Chad, with your interview, we were able to get into the door of Larry Elder and other more prominent black conservatives. Would you mind if we came back and interviewed you some more and followed you on some jobs and so on and so forth? And then the rest was history. But so after Uncle Tom was released, it did very well. And at the time, I was trying to figure some things out with what I wanted to do with my business. And Justin and I were having a conversation, and he said, well, what if you came on as a writer for a sequel to the film, Uncle Tom? So I agreed to do that, and here we are. We're working on part 2, and it's going very well. We interviewed some great people, yourself included, and I believe that this sequel, this follow-up, is going to be even better, even more hard-hitting than the first one.
Well, I thought the first film was great. It was a good length, because a lot of times when you're watching documentary films, they go on and on and on, and it's sort of like being in church and there's a really long sermon, and the pastor has all these excellent places where he could close, and he doesn't take those places. A lot of films, go just a little bit too long. Yeah. I thought the Uncle Tom film was the perfect length. It was engaging. I mean, it was great. And so I hope the sequel will live up to the original or even surpass it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you said something very interesting in the roundtable discussion that we had before the premiere. I don't know if you remember this, but
I haven't seen the roundtable or release, but I know I enjoyed it.
yeah, I'll send it to you after this interview. But you said that one of the things that the left is really good at is telling their stories, even though they don't have logic on their side,
Right.
even though they don't have reason on their side or facts on their side. They're really good at appealing to people's emotions, whereas as conservatives, especially as academic conservatives, we deal in facts, we deal in logic, we deal in wisdom and in truth, and that escapes people sometimes who want to be pandered, who want to be catered to, so to speak. And so leftists understand that. And so what the film was able to do was to personalize our stories, to tell, whether you're talking about Herman Cain, whether you're talking about Patty the farmer, or myself as a plumber, we're telling you our stories and appealing to people that way.
You know what's interesting is that with the political left and critical theory, they argue that a minority, a member of a marginalized group, that their personal narrative, their personal story trumps everything. But when it comes to conservatives, we're telling our personal stories, our narratives, and so I don't see how they can argue that narratives have all this power and then try to draw the line at what we have to say about America and our own experiences.
So with critical race theory, the whole concept of it is conflict theory. Mm-hmm. There's always a conflict, there's always tension, there's always someone who is oppressed and someone who is oppressing. And when it comes to black people, public intellectuals of our day want to, on the one hand, paranoid black youth, make them paranoid, make them think that America is a racist country, whether it's LeBron James saying that you can't walk down the street as a black man without your life being in danger.
Isn't that horrible?
It's very
Isn't
horrible.
It horrible.
It's very horrible.
I mean, they're much worse than Jesse Jackson and even old Al Sharpton.
Absolutely.
Because Jesse Jackson did talk about black crime, and I remember he told this story of walking down the street and hearing footsteps and turning around and being relieved, if it wasn't a young black following him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's very reckless what's going on today. So whether you're talking about black celebrities who are touting this nonsense, or black academics who are touting this nonsense, like Ibram X. Kendi and Ta-Nehisi Coates.
A lot of them have empty suits.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that they come off as though they are authoritative on these issues. They come off as though they have insight and that they figured it all out.
Because of their personal narratives.
Right, because of their personal narratives, but really they're not very authoritative. They're subordinate. They're subordinate to individuals, most of whom are not black,
right,
who are feeding them these talking points, and then they get to write their books and go on their speaking engagements. And what they're saying is basically a regurgitation of these ideas that are very Marxist in essence.
Well, I can tell you, Chad, that in academia, I noticed this a long time ago, that for some reason the progressives, they want angry blacks. And so someone like me, I just wanted to be a political scientist. I just wanted to be, the best in my field, when I was a congressional scholar. And I just wanted to do my work. They wanted to reward the people who were angry, that would entertain them by calling them names. And so it's a minstrel show that they're putting on for the delight of progressive whites. And I tend to find that a lot of them are racist themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to have to go to a break right now. But when we return, I want you to respond about some of this, because they're being used, but they're being paid very well too.
Absolutely.
We'll be back after a word from our sponsor.
Conversations with Dr. Carol Swain is made possible by Cooper Steel, a family-owned business that provides the steel fabrications for some of the greatest buildings across the United States. 60 years ago, Kenneth and Faye Cooper founded their company in Shelbyville, Tennessee.
Cooper Steel believes in sponsoring Carol Swain because we believe, as she does, you build strong, you stand strong.
What started as a vision and now a nationally recognized and operated company that remains true to its founders' Judeo-Christian values and principles. Cooper Steel is committed to excellence, responsibility, and community. Cooper Steel's motto is, build strong, stand strong. They treat their employees and customers like family. Thank you to Cooper Steel for standing strong with Conversations with Dr. Carol Swain. Learn more about our generous sponsor at coopersteel.com.
I'm back with my guest, Chad Jackson. Chad, right before we went to break, I was talking about progressives and how they seem to like to be entertained by angry blacks. Have you noticed that in the interactions between some of the loudest black people that we see out there talking about critical theory and oppression and the progressives that are in the background?
Yeah, it's anger is a tool used by the progressives to fulfill their ultimate agenda, which is the ruling of the proletariat, so to speak. And you have to do that through conflict theory. Karl Marx ended the Communist Manifesto with "Workers of the world, unite." You can't get people to unite unless they're angry about something, unless there's something for them to unite around. And so long as you can keep black people angry, you can unite them with the purpose of pushing this agenda. The average black person who's angry doesn't know what the agenda is. They just know that this is somebody who's coming to me as an amiable, friendly person who is going to basically fulfill my desire, whatever this is, to help relieve me from this misfortune that I'm experiencing here and now.
Now, I would argue that the average black American is not angry, and they have white friends, they're working their jobs, they're going to school, they're going about their lives, and that the people that we see on the news and the ones that are protesting and making all the noise, that they're not representative of black America at all, and Antifa. And there are far more people that are normal Americans just trying to get along than there are these people that are out there complaining about everything. And I would also argue that all of this stuff about racism and becoming anti-racist and white privilege and whiteness, that is a way, to drive that wedge, but it's not about helping black people. It's not about helping Hispanics. It's not about helping Asians. Asians are being used right now. It's all part of the progressive agenda that has Marxist roots, as you stated, and what they really want is to tear down America.
You're absolutely right. And I would argue that to the extent that blacks who aren't angry go along with what the leftist agenda is due to the amiability of the way that they come off, the way that the left comes off. The left comes off as, we're for black people. Look, we put a black person in the vice presidency. Look, we put this black person here. Look, we put this black person here. See?
Except the blacks that they've elevated were not, black Americans.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, it's also, look, we have, even LeBron James is saying what we are telling you. Even Oprah Winfrey is telling you what we're saying. And so a black person doesn't necessarily have to be angry.
Right.
It's more or less the case that this political movement, this political faction, is coming off as friendly, while at the other hand projecting.
Well, they're sticking a knife in
Absolutely.
The back of black America.
Yeah, they're projecting the oppressiveness on conservatives, traditionalists, Christians, so on.
And I would say that one evidence that the broader black populace are not really on the same page with the activists is that something like, 84% of blacks want police. They would like to change the nature of the interactions, but they don't want to defund the police or get rid of police. Yet if you were following the progressive agenda that's put forth by Antifa and Black Lives Matter, you would be trying to get rid of the police forces.
Absolutely. And that's another thing that is one of the goals of Karl Marx, was to tear down the institutions, to tear down the agencies of the state, the agencies of the bourgeoisie. And so to those who are screaming the loudest about defunding the police and tearing down the police systems, they are basically trying to manifest an idea that Karl Marx had, which is to defund the police, to tear it down because it's a system of oppression, it's a system of white supremacy. Blacks, ordinary blacks who go along with that, because not every black does, to your point, most blacks want to keep police in their position to protect them.
They want the same thing that white people want. Everyone, wants the same thing. They just want to get along.
But it's very much a situation where, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and so the voice that's being broadcast loud and proud across mainstream media is, black people are discontent. They don't like the police. There's always this tension. And even though that's not an opinion shared by the majority, it certainly appears that way if you look at the mainstream media, because they are in on this agenda to push leftism.
And when you talk about, communism and Karl Marx, people will sort of dismiss that. But if you actually study Karl Marx's disciples, like Antonio Gramsci and Herbert Marcuse and various other of the theorists that followed him, it's pretty clear that they focused on the culture. They had a plan to go after Christianity and the family. And with Herbert Marcuse, his whole thing was to create, these marginalized groups where you would have a coalition that included, homosexuals, blacks, women, and anyone else, the poor, that had a grievance against society, and use them, to tear down the system. And so these things that we see didn't just happen, it was well planned. Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, that was very important because it taught infiltration, deception, and manipulation. So they're pretty much, it took them maybe 70 years to get to where they are today, but we know the game. It's all out there, and I think that part of what we have to do is just educate people.
Absolutely. I think another name that's worth mentioning is John Dewey.
Right, in the education.
John Dewey, education. We know him as the father of public education. And if you look at his writings, for the average person, what he's trying to say will escape them. But if you know what you're looking for, what you'll find in John Dewey's writings is he very much wanted to remove the concept, the idea of there being a God with how we reason in this public school system. He's what we call a pragmatist, that a person should pay no attention to ancient philosophies, pay no attention to theology, pay no attention to some kind of preconceived notion, and deal in terms of what's right in front of you. That a person can just on a whim make up their own philosophy, and you as a class can come together and decide whether it sounds good or not. And so he was one of the signers of the Humanist Manifesto. Humanism, which he called a religion, is very much the religion that's being taught in our schools.
Well, and we can also say that, that as far as education, that Rockefeller and the Carnegie Foundation, they wanted to remove the influences of the family. So all of these forces have worked together to get us to where we are right now. Now we're going to take a break, and when we return, more with Chad Jackson after this break.
Dr. Carol Swain's Be the People, a call to reclaim America's faith and promise, newly released in paperback and audio with a new introduction, is a challenge to all Americans. If you are serious about being the best citizen you can be, this is the book for you. From addressing moral relativism to reclaiming the future, you'll understand why Dr. Swain is one of the most relevant voices in today's culture war. Are you ready to reclaim America's faith and promise? Purchase at bethepeoplenews.com/books or wherever books are sold.
The Biden administration's executive order on immigration brings to the forefront one of the most volatile issues of our time. In this timely second edition of Debating Immigration, I join my voice to that of other experts to provide you with facts and information that will help you understand what is at stake for our nation. This edition offers 21 original essays that cover race, religion, economics, human smuggling, and civil rights.
Purchase at bethepeoplenews.com/books or wherever books are sold.
I'm back with my guest, Chad Jackson. And Chad, we were talking about education. What are your thoughts about, what needs to happen?
Yeah, so whenever people think of education, they think of education being kind of an institution that genuinely means to educate their children, to prepare them for the larger society, to make them responsible adults, civic, law-abiding citizens. But what they don't understand is that there is an agenda to separate their children from the idea of there being a God. And again, this goes back to John Dewey. And so my advice to parents would be to consider that, to consider what is the purpose of my local public school. There was a Supreme Court case, Lemon v. Kurtzman,
right.
And the opinion of that case landed not on the side of the church. Mm-hmm. There was a three-prong test that was the result of that
right.
of that case, and one of those prongs was that a purpose of a curriculum or of legislation has to be secular
right.
in nature.
Right.
Well, what's the opposite of that which is secular? That which is sacred. We as believers, we as Christians, hold the Word of God to be sacred. We hold the Scriptures to be sacred, and so that's something that is a guiding light for us in terms of how we see the world, how we see each other, how we deal with each other, how we raise our children, so on and so forth. The Bible, or the schools aim to take that out of the picture entirely.
And even the other thing that they're doing is, that they have their own philosophy. They believe that there's no objective truth, mm-hmm. and that everything is relative. And so one of the main things they're trying to do is substitute moral relativism, for traditional values and principles, and that is very dangerous. And even if you are not a Christian or a believer in a religion, you want your children, to have some type of moral guiding principles. With what the progressive left is putting out there, no wonder, we have so much violence in schools, and we have suicide. The suicide rate among young people, among children, has been increasing. And I think it's because we've confused our children. We tell them now that, that there are more sexes than two, that the little girl may not really be a little girl, you may be a little boy. Yeah. We confuse kids starting now with kindergarten.
In primary school.
And we're teaching them things about sex that in the past, maybe you started learning when you were 8 or 9 years old.
Absolutely.
Maybe later. And so no wonder we had the society that we do.
Yeah, people think it's normal these days that a teenager is going to be at odds with their parents. Oh, that's just Jimmy being a teenager.
They encourage it. And
yeah.
With Planned Parenthood, a kid that can't get an aspirin from
mm-hmm.
the school nurse can get birth control.
Yeah.
And in some places, they can get an abortion without informing their parents. And we've stripped childhood away from children, and we're taking more and more authority from the parents.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so you're absolutely right. It is encouraged. And whether you are looking at shows on the Disney Channel, or you always see the teenagers, the children being like the heroes, and the parents being buffoons and
right.
Don't know their left from their right.
Or the husbands.
Yeah, the husbands being couch potatoes,
uh-huh.
and the mom being the only one who's concerned. And even she's, the kids are getting over on her, and even in during the pandemic, whenever children were beginning to move to online classes, there were teachers who were telling the parents, "Look, I'm the teacher. Like, you just stay out of this.
They said don't listen in on your kids' lessons."
Absolutely, and some of them meant well, whatever that means. But
I don't think any of them meant well when they told the parents not to listen in.
Yeah.
I think that it was a mixed blessing because a lot of parents got to find out for the first time what their kids were being taught or not taught.
And a lot of them were upset, and rightly so, because a lot of the thing is, whenever you're a child of Christian parents, you're spending 8 hours a day, 5 days a week in a public school that has a secular agenda. If you're going to church, you're spending maybe an hour or two on a Sunday for the 18 years you're in your parents' home. And so the time that you're in this public school system is going to obviously trump the time that you're in church.
Right.
And with critical race theory entering the church, like, who's to say whether you're actually learning the right thing in the church?
And when you say that, people, critical race theory isn't in my church. Well, if you're talking about social justice and you're not talking about biblical justice, then critical race theory has seeped into your church.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so with all these, high-sounding philosophies entering the church, where do you turn to ensure that your children are being educated the right way? And so I think my advice to parents is to really take ownership of your children's education. Where's the rule that says that you have to cede your children to the state through the public school system?
Well, the state, I believe, will go after the homeschoolers. I mean, they have in the past some, because not because I'm advising parents, but I think that we need to homeschool more of our children or send them to classical Christian schools where they can get an education, or private schools that have not been taken over by the progressive left. But usually, they will hire a diversity officer. That person is steeped in critical race and critical gender theories, and they bring it all in, and they start indoctrinating the children.
It's definitely a fight worth fighting. Parents need to be watchful. They need to ensure that these ideologies are not influencing their children. If you belong to a church, hold your church accountable. Ask them, hey, what are we doing to ensure that we are having an education system of our own to where we can come together as a church community and send our children to that church or school? We in my community, we're starting a classical school where
Wonderful.
we live. So it's like you can that's a battle worth fighting, and I think we as parents need to fight it.
Okay, very quickly, tell our viewers when your next film is going to be out.
So we're working on Uncle Tom 2. It's going to be a phenomenal film. I think it's going to be even better and more informational than the first one. And we're hoping to release it later this year, later 2021, at the latest, early 2022. So that's be on the lookout for that. You're in it. You have a pretty big part in it, and actually one of my favorite parts in it thus far. So yeah, I do encourage people to be on the lookout for that.
Okay, and is there a website where they can follow you?
Yeah, so you can find us on uncletom.com.
Okay.
And right now the film is available on most streaming platforms.
Thank you so much, Chad.
Thank you, Dr. Swain.
We'll be back in a moment.
For those of you who would like to know what exactly our children are facing in their education system, this is a must-read book. It will equip you and prepare you to make decisions about your child's health, about your child's education. So I want to encourage every one of you to grab a copy of Dr. Swain's book and join with me and Carol on the front lines in this critical time to eradicate the liberal abduction of our children.
Thank you for tuning in. It was great having Chad Jackson on the show talking about his latest film, Uncle Tom 2, that will be released sometime either in the fall or the first of the year. So go to uncletom.com to track when that film is going to be released. And we've had some great information on the show today about education, about race, about critical race theory, things that we all need to know about. So make sure you do dig in and listen carefully when you hear these topics being discussed because they impact all of us, our children, and our families. So thank you so much for watching Conversations. I'll see you next week.